In the last video, we built out this use geolocation hook that allowed you to get the location of a user via some permissions in the browser. But we didn't actually go into like what the whole deal was with that custom hook. So we're going to build another one, and we'll go over what makes a custom hook and when you should use it. So if you look on the updated React documentation, react.dev on that site, you'll see a couple of interesting examples, but one that we're going to use in today's video is detecting whether or not a user is online. So I think this one would be cool, especially if you're building a web application where it might be popularly used on like a mobile device. And so maybe you'll want to like limit functionality to certain parts of the application if the user's offline, or maybe you'll show like, hey, you're not connected to the internet. Maybe you'll show a screen like that. So let's go ahead and dive into building it, and we'll explain some things along the way. So we have this hooks directory. If you don't have this code in front of you, I'll leave a link to the repo where we built this geolocation hook, and you can clone it down and follow along as well. So let's create a new file, and we'll call it useIsOnline.js. And then we're going to import a couple of React's out-of-the-box hooks. So you're probably familiar with things like useEffect and useState. And that's the first important thing to note when building a custom hook. A custom hook is meant to share stateful logic across different components. And a key clue that you're sharing stateful logic is that you're actually using one of React's hooks in your custom hook. So if I wasn't using useEffect or useState or whatever, this might just be like a regular utility function. So I might have like just a get online status if I'm not going to actually update any state. But because I'm using useEffect and useState, we know that this can potentially be a custom hook. So I'm going to export const useIsOnline. The second thing to note is that any custom hooks are going to start with lowercase use, and then typically you'll name them with whatever is happening in that hook. So we're checking if the user is online. And then we'll set up some initial state. So we'll say isOnline and set isOnline, and we'll initialize with true. And then from there, we'll get a useEffect that runs without anything in the dependency array. So we just want this to run on mount. And then we'll say handle online is a function that sets isOnline to true. And then similarly, const handle offline sets isOnline to false. So the reason we're writing this is because the event listeners that we're about to add need callback functions in order to, like, when the event happens, what should it do? So on the window, we're going to add an event listener. We're going to listen for whether or not we're online. So when we are online, we want to handle online. And then when we detect that the user is offline, we want to handle offline. Because we've got some event listeners, we want to add our cleanup function so that when the component is unmounted, we're not leaving these event listeners floating around. So we'll have our cleanup where we return and remove each event listener. And then at the end, so outside of our useEffect, we simply want to return isOnline. So to kind of recap what's going on here, we have a piece of state. This is what we want to share in various parts of our application. So typically when you're working on a real application, you're going to have lots of different components, and you might want to share this online status in different components. Now, to prevent any sort of future confusion, something to keep in mind is that anytime you initialize useIsOnline, anytime you use this in a component, it's initializing with whatever state is here. So if you initialize it as true and use it in one component, you're initializing it as true in that component, and then sharing all of this logic scoped solely to that component. The reason that I emphasize this is because it might be easy to think, well, hey, if I can just build a custom hook, why not just use it to share my state globally across the application? The thing is that custom hooks only share logic. They don't share state. So this is not to be confused with any sort of like context or Redux or things like that. It's not meant to be a replacement. All this is doing is saving us from doing all of this stuff where we create a state variable, we build out our use effect, we return, in this case, a Boolean. We would have to copy all of this logic in every single component that we want to use this online status in. But rather than doing that, we can package it all into one hook and then call this hook in whatever component that we want to use it in. So let's see what this looks like in action. If we go over to app.js, you can see our old use geolocation hook was used here before. We can import useIsOnline. And then because all we're doing is returning the Boolean, the isOnline, we could call this whatever we want. So we'll say, like, we could say online status equals useIsOnline, and then console log online status is true. So the only reason I'm typing this as online status is simply to illustrate that all we're returning is true or false. So we're returning isOnline, but all that's going to be set to true or set to false. And so if I wanted to call this isOnline, it would be the same thing. It's just going to return true or false. So let's see if we can simulate then going offline. So if we go over to the network tab, and there's this drop down in the network tab here. I'll try and expand it a little bit more. So go to the network tab right above this filter, right beneath where you clear it all out. And let's do offline. So now you can see isOnline is set to false. So this is just a way that you can simulate your device being offline. So now if I flip it back on, I should see this turn to true. And we do. So a good way to test, again, if it's online, just using that network tab drop-down menu. But at the end of the day, how we would then go about using this is we would maybe have some different screens that say, like, okay, isOnline. If they are online, then let's return this content. But maybe if we're not online, so we'll say if not isOnline, then return, you could do whatever you want here, but say like you are not connected. Okay, so we are online. We see the normal default spinner. But now if we go to offline, you're not connected. And so you can see how this could be useful in different parts of your application. But again, to reiterate, this is a very, very simple example. There's only one app.js file. In theory, you would be using this useIsOnline hook in various components throughout the application, and then using that logic to show or hide different content, maybe contact support if you're not anticipating any sort of network connectivity issues, things like that. But custom hooks can be really powerful. You can use them in different ways for very customized, reusable bits of stateful logic. But again, the key things to remember, number one, a custom hook is going to be using some sort of built-in React hook internally. 2, the goal is to reuse and share stateful logic. So we're not sharing state, we're just sharing logic. And then lastly, a key point to remember is that according to the naming convention, we want to make sure that it starts with lowercase u's, and then you can describe it or be as descriptive with the name as you want with the rest of the name. So again, I'll leave the link to the repo in the description. Check out the React documentation as well. It's got lots of great examples. And if you've got questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. But other than that, thanks a lot for watching. And until next time, have a good one.